Alright, so I'm sitting out here waiting on a ride. And my hair's all messed up, hard hat and shit. Anyway, so I want to bring up something. You always hear about the migrant crisis and everything else. People have been asking me about stories from prison. So I'm going to give you one. Um, I had, when I was up in New Jersey, I had a bunch of cellies that were Muslims. And we'd sit in there and talk about things like, society, culture, religion, all kinds of different shit. And see, now most people don't realize this, and you won't realize this unless you actually, sit down and talk to Muslims. Especially, I want to be careful using the term black Muslims because it often associates people with groups like the Nation of Islam or the Moorish Science Temple. I don't like using the term African American because I don't care what color their skin is, they're Americans. So we sit there discussing Islam and American history and things like that. And as it turns out, everyone talks about Malcolm X. But they forget that, Malcolm X was never assassinated. Malcolm Shabazz was. Now, why is this important? Because Malcolm X did his pilgrimage to Mecca, and when he looked around and seen, hey, there's Arabs and white people and Asians and blacks, and they're all Muslims, and are all coming together under one religion, he realized that, what he was being taught at the time from the Nation of Islam wasn't exactly accurate to the Quran and to Islam. So he had got rid of the X and became Malcolm Shabazz. Now, everything he ever said wasn't so much taken back, but he changed a lot of his rhetoric to be more inclusive, to win hearts and minds, to bring people towards Islam, as opposed to the what was being put forth by the Nation of Islam at the time. He became a Sunni Muslim. That's very important. So when he became a Sunni Muslim, he took the surname Shabazz. Whew, that wind's cold. Cover up the top on that. Anyway, so, and why this is important is when you're looking at the migrant crisis and all these people coming over. A lot of them are coming over from countries like Venezuela and Ecuador, and they're coming across the Mexican border, but they're not even Mexicans. They're Hispanic, they're Spanish, yes, but they're not Mexicans. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, they're attacking the Mexicans and stuff like that, but they're not the ones responsible for this. This is coming from other countries. When I was in prison, I read a book put out by Pathfinder Press. They no longer have it, called Can a Socialist Revolution Happen in America? And in that book, they were talking about they needed to import these migrants from these communist countries to be the militant vanguard of the communist revolution, the socialist revolution here in America. Think about that. And this is where the thing comes back with the Muslims and Malcolm Shabazz and everything. And I learned this from talking to Muslims. Like, you're not going to find anything out if you don't ask people and talk to them and hear their input on things. No, as a Christian, I don't agree with what their religion teaches as far as the divinity of Jesus Christ. And as Muslims, they don't agree with what I believe as a Christian. But it's cool because we decided to settle this Old Testament style. We'll let God judge between us. Simple as that. God will decide which one of us is right or wrong. And for the rest of it, we're just people. But yeah, this comes to a funny story about prison. You guys, some people asked me about that. I was talking about my, which is going to the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way, my case and how fucked up it was, and how the evidence was so glaringly obvious that if they look at it, they have to side with me, which no one looked at it. The fucking goddamn Fourth Circuit didn't even look at it. They just rubber stamped it and fucking did some bullshit and said, nah, whatever, we agree with these guys without even looking at the evidence. Violating fucking U.S. Supreme Court rulings, covering up evidence for corruption and criminality and everything. And at this point, I'm just like, what would you guys do if I just said fuck it and just said, you violated the social contract of the United States of America, and I no longer accept your authority, and come and enforce it. I mean, the only thing you're gonna do is send people with guns after me, which is what you're doing to begin with. So what the fuck do I care? Now, in this discussion, this other guy who was not one of my Muslim cellies, was like, well, what would you bet on it? I'm like, fuck it. I was like, I'll bet my life. And he's like, would you bet your ass? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, yeah, so you'd let your cellies fuck you if you lose. I'm like, I look at my cellies because they're Muslims. And I've lived with these guys, and I know them. They're devout Muslims, right? Fucking, they go by Sharia law. They're not even gay to begin with. There's no touch of that in there. And you're asking me if they're going to do something that's against their nature as a person and then against their beliefs, And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Because it's a win-win. They're not going to do it even if I lose, so I don't care. And, I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, oh, no, that's gay. Well, somehow this little fucking conversation makes it back to some Muslim shot callers. And they pull me aside for a little bit. And they're like, well, why would you say this? I'm like, because they're Muslims. And one guy's all fucking mad. He's like, what the fuck does that mean? I was like, it means fucking I live with these guys. They're fucking devout Muslims. I was like, they're not even gay to begin with. And fucking, Sharia law says don't be gay, so they're not going to be gay. Fucking, I was like, so I win-win. Even if I lose, they're not going to do anything. Fucking, and they're like, oh, okay. Fucking, like, they was amazed that you had a white Christian who actually respected the ideas of Islam and actually thought that, and actually had faith in the beliefs of the Muslim men that I was around, that I got to know and had taught me about Islam. And so it becomes one of these things, fucking, it kind of shocked them that I had that much faith in those guys and their belief system. And Christianity and Islam, regardless of whether we believe one is right or wrong, has a lot of the same moral code. A lot of the things in the Bible that it says is wrong for Christians and Jews is also the same thing that it says is wrong for Muslims. So the issue is that, as a veteran, when I was off overseas defending the rights of other Americans, I wasn't just defending the rights of white Americans or my family or whatever. I was defending the rights of every American. And, white or black is just something we fucking check on a box. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. So we all have the right to believe what we want. I'm not gonna, I might criticize your belief, but I'm not criticizing you as a human being for believing it. And I take it the same way when you say the same stuff about me. In fact, we even had debates over me explaining to them about the Dukes of Hazzard. These guys are all from up north, and not myself, some other guys. And they were like, well, how's it not racist? I'm like, dude, have you ever watched Dukes of Hazzard? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, do you realize that the only competent cop on that show was the black guy? And it was like, there was a black guy? I was like, yeah, in later episodes, a state trooper had to come down to try to catch the Duke boys because the local cops couldn't do it. And it was a black guy, and he was the only competent cop they had on the show. And we got talking about, Confederate history, how there's a lot of stuff that's suppressed because people keep writing off the South as being these horrible slave-owning states that nobody wants to look at their side of the story. So there's some historians out there who make the argument through going over some of the stuff that was said in Senate hearings and letters between senators and congressmen of the time, talking about how they believe that they want to take Southern slavery and bring it north to put it in the factories because the Southern states were ordering machinery from Europe that was cheaper to make in Europe and cheaper to buy from Europe, France and particularly, than what it was to get it made up north in the United States and sent all the way back down to them. And in the course of doing that, they were already in the process of ending slavery. You can look up the Cotton Gin anytime you want. So it would have already ended. And if you've ever seen the Harriet Tubman movie, you'll notice there's a part in that movie where they let the southern slave owners come forward, come up north and reclaim their runaway slaves, and they're just grabbing any black person off the street like, yeah, that's, fucking my runaway, and this guy's never been a slave in his life. They're just snatching them up and taking them down south. So if the Civil War was about slavery, then why was they allowing these people to come up here and get their slaves that were never slaves to begin with before the Civil War even occurred? And there's this thing called the Morris Tariff and all that other stuff you get into. And when you look at history, they're always trying to divide us. There's this study, the guy who did all the studies on systemic racism, a bunch of his information has been proven wrong. So all these studies have been quoted like 18,000 times, and spread around, have been proven false because this guy falsified his information. It's a New York Times article. And so now, why is that important? Because black people already defeated systemic racism when, during the time of Jim Crow, during the time of Malcolm X, during the Civil Rights Movement, during the protest marches and bringing light to this stuff. And they got rid of things like Jim Crow and one bathroom for white people and another bathroom for minorities. And they did all of that. They've already defeated it. So it goes back to the whole argument about putting Jesus back on the cross. All right, I'm back from work. So, finished my little thought for you. All right, so, and it's like this. You guys might not understand it. You might. So, and like I was talking about to these Muslim guys, I don't have to believe what you believe, but as a believer, myself, I understand that I believe in something, that I value something that other people can't see, can't hear, can't feel, can't understand. So as a believer, I can respect another believer, even if I don't believe the same things that they believe, because I'm a believer. And I can understand that. So we get into these whole things, we start talking, having these deep philosophical conversations about stuff. And it comes down to, like, they're teaching me things. And this goes back to the thing with Malcolm X and Malcolm Shabazz. Malcolm X went to Mecca and he had a spiritual experience. And he got rid of the X and became Shabazz. And when he came back as Malcolm Shabazz, a lot of what he was doing, a lot of what he was promoting wasn't that Islam was simply a religion for black Americans, that it included all these different ethnic groups, all these different nationalities, all these different economic levels, all these different people within society. And so after what he was teaching became different. It became more inclusive, and he was trying to draw people in under the banner of Islam, not as anything to do with race or anything else, but as how can you, as a believer, how can you, as someone who has devoted yourself to following Allah, allow these things to happen to these people, speaking about black Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. And so when you look at that and when you think of that, and see, I only know this because I was around Muslims who taught me, because I asked questions and they asked questions of me, and we tried to find common ground. And I expect everybody wants some big story about me fighting in prison or something. And I had a couple of fights, but it comes down to this, and this was to me more important than the fighting stuff. I got to see and understand a little bit of what other people believed and what they thought, and the history behind their beliefs and the things that we're talking about. So in that respect, when you're, and I mentioned this book, can a socialist revolution or can a communist revolution occur in America? Where they're talking about having to bring in all these immigrants from South America, from these communist countries to be the military vanguard in the revolution. They lean towards, and no one looks at what Malcolm Shabazz says, because people are too busy promoting what Malcolm X said, because Malcolm X was kind of a radical, and they want to radicalize people, and they want to radicalize Muslims, and they want to create this idea that, Muslims or black people are somehow dangerous because of they want to create that division between us as people. Well, here's the thing. Like I said before, white or black is just some box I check on the thing, on the census report or whatever, government form they want me to fill out. But we're all Americans. We all have the same rights. And those rights come with responsibilities. Most people don't realize this. There's a preamble to the Bill of Rights that says in order to ratify the Constitution, certain states said certain declaratory clauses had to be added. Rather than rewrite the Constitution to add those declaratory clauses, they created the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. So you have the right to freedom of religion. You have the right to freedom of speech. You have the right to peaceably assemble. You have all these rights. And then you have the Second Amendment, which is your right to be able to defend yourself against the very government you have. If you don't believe me, go read through the historical background that Justice Scalia wrote in DC versus Heller, or Heller versus DC. This is, in fact, one of the things he points out. So it doesn't matter what my opinion is, the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a ruling, in a case, made that same argument. And you have to understand why these people want to radicalize, why they want to divide us. Because if we stopped and we said, these Muslims aren't my enemy, these Christians aren't my enemy, these Jews aren't my enemy, these white people aren't my enemy, these black people aren't my enemy, these Chinese people, these Asian people aren't my enemy, these Spanish people aren't my enemy. Our problem is the people trying to divide us, make us blame each other, when in the end it's not even about rich or poor like the socialists claim. It's about the haves and the have-nots. And you think the haves and the have-nots, well, that's the rich and the poor. No. The haves and the have-nots is power. See, it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you have power, you have control over that money. Don't believe me? What do you think about the government wanting to tax? Where's the government get its money? It taxes it, takes it from people, rich and poor alike. Who writes the tax laws? The tax laws that let the rich stay rich. Trump even pointed this out. I know this because I'm smart. He uses the tax laws. He can afford to pay someone to manipulate the tax laws so that he pays less taxes. For some poor person like myself, I got to learn this on my own. And you have to wonder about that level of division. Because think of it like this, right? Malcolm Shabazz, rather, was less radical, was more inclusive. He was focused on winning hearts and minds, gaining popular support, which is the basis of which anything in guerrilla warfare is based on. But Martin Luther King was doing the exact same thing. He's just doing it from an earlier standpoint than what Malcolm Shabazz was. And Malcolm Shabazz goes from the radical confrontationist as Malcolm X to being Malcolm Shabazz, who was a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more spiritual, and was drawing more people to the fight. Either one of those men could have completely changed the fabric of America had they not been assassinated. And they were killed because there was a fear of how much they could have changed the fabric of America. And you got to realize they lived in a time when there was racism by law, where there's a different bathroom, a different water fountain for white people and black people. where we were required to be against each other and be divided because the people in power created laws to do that. It doesn't matter if you were racist or if you weren't racist, there were laws in place that were going to make you racist. And so when you understand that, you understand that the battle against systemic racism has already been won. It was won during the time of Martin Luther King. It was won during the time of Malcolm X. It was won because of them. And it doesn't matter Christian or Muslim. If you look at the civil rights movement and you look at the people involved in it and you look at the influence of it, it was a Christian, Martin Luther King Jr., and it was a Muslim, Malcolm Shabazz, also Malcolm X, slash Malcolm X if you feel better, that were the influences, were the drivers behind that made that change possible. And so I'm pointing all this out while I'm also talking about this prison story about how some guy took something out of context and fucking how everything was, because I want you to understand, going to prison wasn't like some fucking 80s action movie, like where you're going to be fighting against people and people trying to rape you in the shower and shit like that. I mean, there might be in some prisons, I don't know, but from my experience, it comes down to this, we're either, you take people who from wildly different backgrounds, wildly different geopolitical locations, wildly different socioeconomic conditions, and you cram them all together, and you want to keep them divided. You want to try to make these people against each other. And prison was a microcosm for what's going on in this country, for how people are, doing the things they are to keep us divided. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. So it comes down to this, if we look at ourselves as anything other than Americans, I don't care what your skin tone is, what your ethnicity is, anything else. The only time I don't use the term American for an American, I don't like the term African American, because you're American. You've only been raised and lived in America, and you only know America. And if you, what would be the point of going back to Africa? You don't know the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know the people, you don't know the history and the tradition like someone who was natively there. You're not African. You're an American. Just like I'm not Irish. I'm not an Irish American. I'm ethnically Irish, or because I have ancestors who are Irish. But there's also some Cherokee and Deutsche Roma and other stuff mixed in there. But I can't go to Ireland and speak Gaelic and Celtic, and just because I'm there, I'm not going to go to Ireland and simply fall into Irish society because I'm not a part of that. Only thing I know is American society. And so, and this is something I seen like so much of in prison that kind of blew my mind. If I make myself anything less than an American, if I see any one of my countrymen as anything less than my fellow countrymen, as anything less than American, then I have this problem that I'm mentally segregating myself. We might have had laws back in the day that forced segregation on us, but if we let the racism of classifying ourselves as anything other than countrymen, united under the belief that you have inalienable rights and I have inalienable rights, that you should be able to believe what you want, I should be able to believe what I want, and that I can respect you as another human being regardless of anything else, and maybe I can respect you even more as a believer because I'm a believer too. We don't have to believe the same things. We don't have to agree on our beliefs. We don't have to I just have to be able to see that you have the same strength of faith that in what you believe, that I have the same strength of faith that in what I believe, and that's a starting point. That's a starting point for learning, for talking to people, for understanding people. And when you do this, one, everything becomes a learning experience. But more importantly, when you do this, your learning experience becomes a matter of unity. And when I say that, you're like, well, unity, what do you mean? Well, it's cold, and I work in a place with no heating and no air conditioning, and so I it's winter, and I just let the beard grow out to keep my face warm. I let the hair grow out around my bald spot because it keeps my head warm. Summer gets here, spring at least, when it gets warm enough, this shit's all shaved off. But I'm gonna look like Uncle Fester. But it comes down to this: if you cannot see the value of another person, if you can't learn from other people that are different from you because you keep putting all these barriers between you, saying, well, they're different because of this, they're different because of that, they're different for this, they're different for that, and you keep creating this wider and wider gulf that you can't find mutual understanding and mutual appreciation, just as human beings who have to share this rock, then you run into this problem that anywhere you go is a prison because the chains are in your mind.